On behalf of the president of Villanova University, Father Peter Donahue, and on behalf of the board of directors of the Community Breakfast Collaborative, welcome to Villanova University and welcome to 2022 Undoing Racism Day in person and live streaming. It's so nice to be back together again after having to be separated for the couple of years, but we were still there with you on Zoom for two events, 2021 and 2020. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you, first of all, to the Community Breakfast Collaborative Board of Directors and Colin McCrossan, our scholar in residence. And are our Board of Directors around? Could just stand up at your tables for a second? All right. Thank you. Thank you to my students of the Augustine and Culture Seminar Program Ancients course here at Villanova University. These are first-year students, so we normally have class at this time. Do you guys want to just wave? Would that be okay? I don't want to put you on the spot. So it's very important that they're here so we could have intergenerational dialogue as well as all of the other inters. And then thank you to the many numerous distinguished leaders of faith communities, businesses, civic groups, schools, universities, townships, counties, and our local police officers. Thank you so much for being here and connecting with everybody. Now, Reverend Veronica Travis is going to give the opening prayer, but I just want to say that given the mission of the Community Breakfast Collaborative, we're really here today because of love. So I'm using that four-letter word, love. We're here because of beloved community, and that we know that the structure of our society is wrongly constructed, and some parts need undoing. They need correction. They need change. So I ask you all to open your hearts and listen to your hearts today and really talk with each other at the tables. So I just wanted to bring up that very important word, love. And now I'll turn it over to Chuck Marshall first, and then Reverend Veronica will be after Chuck. Thanks.
The Community Breakfast Collaborative would like to give a memorial tribute to Luella Mason Lucci. Luella died this past year on July 22nd, and she was a leader in the community, one of the outstanding African-American leaders in the community. She was 86, and by the way, you'll find on the back of your program her picture and a biographical write-up. I'm just going to highlight a few things. Her family grew up in South Carolina, and they moved to the Rosemont area in the 40s, and she graduated from Radnor High School. She received an associate's degree from Spring Garden Institute, and later on achieved a bachelor's of social work and an MBA from Antioch University. One of the first socially active demonstration she did was to participate in the walk in Washington in 1963. She married Louis Lucci in 1978 at Saints Memorial Baptist Church in Bryn Mawr. She became a deacon of that church eventually and was a member until her death. Louis Lucci was an environmental and safety officer with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Mrs. Lucci started her social work at the Senior Citizens Center of Ardmore, later called PALM, for positive aging in Lower Merion. She was the executive director for 16 years, and for that work achieved the J.A. Younger Humanitarian Award in 2008. Mrs. Lucci developed many displays and talks on African American history and personalities, and especially local African American sports person, entertainers, and other people. Mrs. Lucci headed the Radnor Township Civic Association on Highland Avenue. The RTCA is a community center and is the oldest African-American center on the Main Line. She helped lead the program to renovate the RTCA building after extensive water damage. And she was president of the RTCA for many years until 2021. If you'd like to know more about the RTCA, there's brochures. That's the literature table, by the way. And there's some brochures on the RTCA over there. It's available for community organizations to rent. Mrs. Lucci was also a member of the Red Hat Society, and she was a member of the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society and worked to have her property certified as a backyard wildlife habitat. Her husband, Louis, died in 2017. Thank you.
And here's Reverend Veronica Travis, who is the pastor of two churches here on the Main Line, Christ Church, Ithan, and St. Martin's.
Gracious God, we welcome you into this space with all of us. We know that you're always with us, and we ask that you give us strength and that you give us your peace as we talk about difficult things and as we open ourselves to the solutions that you are giving us through our creativity and our love for each other. We ask that you bring us together and that you help us to take from here practical, positive, and purposeful ways of changing our neighborhoods and our community. In your name we pray. Amen.
And now I'm really happy to welcome up here to this lectern Dr. Candace Robertson-James. Dr. Candace Robertson-James is really a super friend of the Community Breakfast Collaborative. She has been a panelist at two of our Undoing Racism Day events, and she's going to be our moderator today. And her support to this event through the years really has been very important, and we value it a lot. So welcome Dr. Robertson-James up here, and then also our panelists, Allegra Cressman, Noah Marlier, Kimberly Johnson. Thank you very much for coming up here, and you can take any of these seats, and Dr. Robertson-James, I'm sure, will get you all organized. And then as you have questions for the panelists, after some introductory parts, you can write those on the index cards and just raise the index card up. And Diana Robertson is our really chief person for going and collecting, but a few of us board members will come around from different sides of the table and collect your index cards. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hope you all are well. Thank you so very much for that lovely introduction. I'm very excited for the opportunity to moderate such an important discussion this morning. Today, obviously, as you've heard, we're here to talk really about the intersection of homelessness and racism. And some people may not realize the persistent, that this is such a persistent public health issue and really crisis in our country. Just to set the framework so that we're all on the same page and really recognizing the significance of this issue, I'm just going to kind of give you a little bit of background information, and then I'm going to introduce our panelists and get us started with questions. So on a single night in January of 2020, there were over 580,000 people reported to experience homelessness on that one day. And homelessness has increased between the years of 2019 and 2020 for the third year in a row. Ultimately, we know that about 30% of people experiencing homelessness did so as part of a family unit. And 18% of those experiencing homelessness were children under the age of 18. We are here because race is a significant predictor of homelessness, and perhaps better said, racism is a strong predictor of homelessness. As in many other areas of life in the U.S., historically marginalized groups are more likely to experience homelessness as a result of segregation and discrimination in employment and housing, among other things that I'm sure we'll hear from our panelists today. Housing insecurity, in addition to so many people experiencing homelessness, we recognize that homelessness is actually a part of a spectrum from housing insecurity more broadly all the way to homelessness at the other end of that spectrum. And so as we've heard, things like being unable to pay a rent or a mortgage, involuntary displacement from housing, having to use shelters or transitional housings, having to live with family or friends or move in frequently with family and friends, living in unsafe conditions where there's poor quality of housing around you, are all a part of this sort of spectrum of housing insecurity that we often talk about. And in fact, just recently in 2021, almost 4 million people were reported housing in some type of housing insecurity. So just think about that number. Almost 8 million adults report that they are behind on their rent. So just think again about the significance of that number. And over 1 million evictions have occurred since March 2020, and over 8,000 evictions were reported just last week. Hopefully you're beginning to get the picture of the significance of this issue and the importance of our conversations and our discussions here this morning. So I also want to recognize quickly that beyond these numbers, that we understand the impact of homelessness on people who are housing insecure. They experience increased rates of trauma, healthcare expenditures, hospitalizations, increased substance use, chronic conditions, disability, traumatic brain injuries, depression, anxiety, psychological distress, suicide, decreased life expectancy, parental stress, high blood pressure, worse self-reported health for themselves and their children. Children who are homeless or housing insecure are sicker. They have academic struggles. They have emotional and behavior problems, or increased likelihood of being developmentally delayed. Experience hunger, abuse, and neglect, low birth weight, lead poisoning, and asthma, just to name a few. So hopefully now you have a bit of a better understanding of the magnitude of this issue and the importance, really, of our conversation here today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our esteemed panel this morning. First, we have Allegra Cressman, who's the Executive Director of Family Promise of the Main Line, Norristown. Ms. Cressman has more than 30 years experience working with families and individuals experiencing the crisis of homelessness. She started her career as a caseworker, and as her experience and skills deepened, worked as a trainer for program participants and community residents, and was promoted to supervisor and program director. She also promoted the organization through community outreach, public speaking, and fundraising through special events. The Montgomery County Centralized Homeless and Housing System, Your Way Home, overseen by the Office of Housing and Community Development, named Ms. Cressman a 2018 Champion of Change. She began her tenure as Executive Director of Family Promise of the Main Line, formerly Interfaith Hospitality Network of the Main Line, in March of 2018. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Cressman.
Thank you.
Next, we have Kimberly Johnson, Resource Coordinator of the Women's Resource Center in Wayne. Kimberly Johnson is passionate about helping people to have their needs met regardless of race, ethnicity, gender identification, religion, nationality, level of ability, and/or sexual orientation. She believes that every person has the right to be treated with respect and to have access to needed resources and services. With over 20 years of work experience in several nonprofit agencies, Kimberly has had a broad array of case management and counseling experiences that have shaped her career with helping people. Kimberly has had an undergraduate degree in sociology at Temple University and holds a Master of Social Work from the Bryn Mawr College of Graduate School of Social Work and Social Research. Please join me in welcoming Kimberly. And lastly, but not least, we have Noah Marlier, Prothonotary of the Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Noah is the Montgomery County Prothonotary. He leads the office and processes the majority of civil filings for the Montgomery County Common Pleas Court. Committed to helping the community through his work, Noah frequently speaks on landlord-tenant matters and the eviction crisis. NOAA has participated in various forums and teams up with Your Way Home to share information about county resources for renters and how to file an eviction appeal through the Prothonotary's office. NOAA's additional community outreach include being a vocal advocate for domestic violence awareness and prevention, as well as for LGBTQ+ rights, and helping to implement DEI initiatives in county government. Please join me in welcoming NOAA. So I'm going to kick us off with some questions, but as was mentioned, as we are talking and as you're hearing from our panelists, we hope that we hear questions from you. And so as we're just introducing some initial questions, we hope to collect questions from you as we move forward. So I'm going to start by asking each panelist to just share a little bit about yourself and your work as it relates to our theme of homelessness and racism.
So I'll go first. As the Executive Director of Family Promise at the Main Line, we are a family emergency shelter. So we are the safety net to the safety net. We are seeing families enter shelter firsthand and seeing all of the issues that they're dealing with. Family Promise is a 30-year-old organization. We work in collaboration with our interfaith community, and specifically interfaith community here along the Main Line. We are a different kind of model. So we're not a big model where families are sleeping in a large gym. They're sleeping overnight in a host congregation, and I see many of you in the audience that are part of our rotational model. They're eating dinner and sleeping overnight, and folks like you are volunteering and having input in those families' lives. So it's an effective, affordable way to shelter families, and it's a very personal, client-centered model. And I've been a part of this model for at least 20 years, and I've watched families gain much success. They've gained self-esteem, they've gained skills. The things that happen in the evening with our volunteers is not something that sometimes we as professionals can do. It is the soft skills that are happening and the modeling happening in the evening that speak into the lives of our families. But as of today, this time last year, our numbers are doubled today from last year of families that are experiencing homelessness in Montgomery County. There are over 70 families, and these are 70 families that tonight don't have a bed or a place to call home.
Thank you. Whoever wants to go next.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Well, I guess also in the information that you heard about me, I'm also a student at Lancaster Theological Seminary.
Awesome.
I'm working on my Master's in Divinity. And I guess I have a curiosity about mental health in BIPOC communities where faith and mental health intersect and or collide, which speaks to homelessness in minority populations, marginalized people, because I've found in my career a lot of it has to do with mental health and the lack of funding and appropriate treatment for people. As I said, I've got way more than 20 years of experience in the field. My work has primarily been with families, and so I've met all kinds of families and all kinds of homeless and I guess housing insecure situations. I've run into a lot of that over the years as well, and currently at the Women's Resource Center, although I'm working with a lot of displaced homemakers still, housing insecurity is very real for a lot of the women, that I service. So, you just never know by looking at someone, if they have a secure place to stay, if they have a warm roof over their head, if they're in a place where they're safe and welcome.
Thank you.
Well, good morning again. My name is Noah Marlier, and I am your Montgomery County Prothonotary. So if you learn anything this morning, maybe you learn what the heck a Prothonotary is. The county courts, if you file a civil legal paper in the courts, this is in criminal matters, But if you file a civil legal paper in the court, if you're getting divorced, custody issues, name changes, any civil filing where you're being sued or suing someone, those legal papers get filed in my office before anyone sees a courtroom, oftentimes before anyone has an attorney. Specifically to this issue, and why I'm so passionate about evictions and homelessness and educating people on that and discussing that, is because in my office you would file an appeal from an eviction. So a district court, local district judge might evict someone, and that person only can appeal that eviction by filing legal paperwork in my office. So during the pandemic specifically, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, I became very passionate about making sure people had access to the court system when frankly the court system was closed down. A little bit of background, I'm from Montgomery County. I grew up in Jenkintown, a little bit tinier municipality than Lower Merion. I grew up through the Jenkintown school system, went to college to become a public school teacher, and I taught in Virginia for a number of years and taught in the Peace Corps before going to law school, becoming a district attorney, assistant district attorney here in Montgomery County, and then running for office. So this is an elected position, Prothonotary, and I take it, and I'll talk about this I'm sure a little bit more, but I take it very seriously. This county is 850,000 people. It's bigger than 4 states in population. And the way I see it, if us as county-wide electeds are not speaking about issues like homelessness and evictions and trying to rally people in support of folks in our community that are far too often marginalized, then I don't know what the heck we're doing as elected officials. So I am so grateful to be here this morning, and I'm looking forward to having this discussion. I just want to thank the Community Breakfast Collaborative for having us and for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we discussed a little bit, we observe that marginalized groups are often overrepresented among individuals experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. Can you all share your thoughts about the intersection of racism and class with homelessness and housing insecurity? We can begin with you.
Yeah, I'll start. The families that we're seeing in shelter, 90% are BIPOC households. In 2019, the Your Way Home, it is a centralized community response with a private-public partnership with Montgomery County. They did a whole research project, and they found that 20% of the population that is homeless, 20% in our thing in our county were homeless, and of that 20%, 59% are BIPOC households experiencing homelessness. There's a disparity there. There's a, why 59% versus white households, and that discrepancy there. So yeah, we see when our families enter, they have already faced many obstacles. They've faced racism in work, in housing discrimination, and just even the legal system and access to the safety net resources. So there's definitely disparities and unfairness and unjustness happening.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, yes, in my experience, most of the homeless families that I've encountered in my career have been marginalized people. Although the Women's Resource Center is in technically Delaware County, and that's where I've done most of my work. So, in Delaware County, Community Action Agency handles the homeless population, and if you go to their shelters and the public housing and things, most of the residents in Delaware County are people of color, whereas they're not the majority of the citizens of the county. They are the majority of the citizens of the county who are experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity.
Yeah, I think what we've seen over the last couple of years, and I know that there's, I'm sure, people here in this room that have been fighting this fight for decades, but what we've seen over the last couple of years with the pandemic is a reckoning, in my opinion, and an eye-opening for many people on the disparity, the disparate treatment of people in our society, the fact that people of color, for sure, suffer more from eviction, suffer more from homelessness, and this isn't out of nowhere. This is a construct of our society. This is what we have built over not just decades, but centuries. Poverty, redlining, pushing people of color to certain communities, not selling homes to people of color based purely on the color of their skin, evicting people because of the color of their skin, and these things snowball. And I think we saw during the pandemic that snowball effect. When people lost their homes, they lost, number one, the place where they could protect themselves from COVID. Where did we all go? We all went to our homes. And if you lost your home, if you were on the street, that was your biggest protector from this awful, awful virus. Number two, where did the children go to get schooling? They got schooled in their homes. And if they lost their homes, they no longer had the place where they could be safe and study and be in school. And so those examples right there are examples of how homelessness and eviction can snowball and have an even greater impact, on a generational impact, frankly. So we do see people of color disproportionately impacted by evictions. I see it in my office for the people that come in and are appealing those evictions. And I think there's a host of reasons why that might be. When you're talking about the legal community, you're talking about access to good attorneys, to have enough money to afford an attorney. Oftentimes when people are being evicted from their home, by the nature of what's happening to them, eviction, they don't have enough money to pay the rent, let alone some attorney, and I am an attorney, but some attorney who's asking for hundreds of dollars an hour to represent them. And if you don't have an attorney at a hearing, you're at a huge disadvantage. And if you don't think the landlord has an attorney, you're very mistaken. They have an attorney, they have representation. They're sitting there in district court in front of a local district judge here in Lower Merion, and they're making the arguments on behalf of the landlord, and those arguments are going to be successful because the person on the other side doesn't have representation, is marginalized, is most likely struggling financially, struggling maybe with mental health issues, potentially other issues that make it very hard for them to have the wherewithal to fight back against a system that for far too long has crushed them.
Thank you. Well, the questions are coming, so
Yeah,
you all have
and,
piqued some interest.
Some other facts are people of color pay 15% higher rents, and they are earning 8% less in income. So how do you combat that? How do you sustain when your rent is 15% higher than your neighbor next door to you and your income is less, and you have a car accident, you lost a paycheck? It does just spiral, and it leads to housing insecurity quickly.
Thank you for adding that. So I'm going to start to ask some of the questions that you all have, and certainly whoever feels comfortable, you all don't have to answer all the questions so that we can get through as many questions as possible that the audience has. So whoever feels comfortable or has a desire to answer, please feel free. The first question is, what role does racism play in the reluctance of mainline communities to encourage the development of affordable housing? So what role does racism play in the reluctance of mainline communities to encourage the development of affordable housing? Who wants to take that one? Nice, easy question we'll start us off with. Yes.
Just by its very nature, people want to be with people who look like them, who know the same things that they know. They have the same connections, same history. Just recently, one of my clients was looking for an apartment, and she wanted me to go with her. And our director ended up going with her. I said, because when she goes to the rental office, I won't be an asset to her at the rental office. As well educated as I am, many times people don't see that. They just see the color of my skin and assume things about me that they have no knowledge.
Absolutely.
I think also along the Main Line, and there's other communities, so I don't want to point out the Main Line community, but there's other communities where people of color were not able to purchase homes and to pass down that wealth. So when you own land, you pass that wealth down generation to generation. And the Main Line is a very clear picture of that wealth that's been passed down generation to generation here, making it very difficult for families of color to even step into this community. There are pockets, just as in any other community, where you're going to see people that look like you. But it's that generational wealth and that the racism that took place generations ago that stopped that in this community. And so there's still that mindset of not in my community, not in my neighborhood, and the affordability. There's truly a lack of affordable rental units in this community.
You know, if I could just jump in, my father, as a Jewish man, faced discrimination, sure. But my father benefited from the GI Bill. And many black people after World War II that fought for this country were discriminated against by our own government. So when we talk about these societal factors and we talk about generational wealth, and some people might kind of be, listening to that and going, well, why is it wrong to pass on wealth to our children? What's wrong with that, Instead of looking at the systemic issue and the systemic problem. But also there are governmental actions that have pushed down people of color over and over and over again. If you look at the GI Bill, that was a way, we talk about that, for a whole generation of men to go to school and provide for their families and create a middle class like this country had never seen throughout the late 40s, 50s, into the 60s. And I think that when you take away, just if you look at that one example of discrimination against people of color, that has a huge impact for generations at a time. I am still benefiting from my father benefiting from the GI Bill. And that's just one generation removed, and that's not even including all the different systemic racism, examples of systemic racism permeating throughout our society. I would also point out, and as an elected official, sometimes elected officials like to dodge these things and they like to kind of sugarcoat it. But when I wanted to go out into the community and talk about evictions, talk about homelessness with different municipalities throughout Montgomery County, and partner with Your Way Home to do so, there was a lot of pushback from the municipalities themselves. These are elected officials in the different municipalities. They don't want to talk about homelessness. They don't want to talk about eviction. Not in my community. It doesn't happen here in Abington or Cheltenham or other places throughout Montgomery County, which is obviously false. It happens throughout Montgomery County. 66 zip codes in Montgomery County, 60% of the evictions take place in Norristown and Pottstown. 60% in 2 municipalities. So there is a discrepancy there that needs to be remedied. And we remedy it by talking about it, doing what we're doing this morning. But a lot of people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it because they don't want to admit it happens in their community. They don't want to talk about it because it doesn't happen to people that look like them. And I think that's a major problem.
Absolutely. Thank you. So kind of continuing with that, we have a question of what can local governments do to better support and provide options for those experiencing homelessness? So kind of continuing, the audience wants to know what can local governments do to better support and provide options for those experiencing homelessness?
Yeah, so I was really disheartened this last month or so when one of our local governments decided to make an ordinance against homelessness and those experiencing homelessness. You've all heard, in Philadelphia, they move them along. I'm going to move them along and tear down tent cities. Well, one of our local governments is now criminalized being homeless in parks and in other areas. So that means if I'm homeless with my family or I'm homeless single adult, and I've been given a tent because that's the only available resource to me at the time, and I set my tent up and the police come along, I'm going to be asked to move along. Where am I moving along to? Where am I taking my belongings, my very few belongings that I have? And if I don't move as quick as the police would like me to move, or I don't move as quick as local government would like me to move, I'm criminalized then for being homeless, for experiencing homelessness. I'm now a criminal.
And Allegra, to your point, depending upon where you are on the scale of homelessness, if you don't have an address, you can't get help. You cannot receive government benefits without an address, and you would be amazed at how much effort and time you have to put into proving that you are truly destitute. People are always worried about people frauding the system. It's hard to defraud the system because you have to spend so much time sitting in offices having people speak to you in dehumanizing ways. I know because I've sat in the office with my clients and I've had to advocate for them and remind people that you have your job and your home and your benefits because of the misery and misfortune of these people. And so it's very, very difficult to even receive benefits. And so we need better funding. We need better trained people. We actually need more because most of these agencies are understaffed. And I suspect that's by design. Mm-hmm. They're understaffed, and the staff that's there is overworked, which causes chronic turnover. Clients cannot receive continuity of service because every time they go to see whoever it is that they're working with, there's someone new there, and they have to start all over again with their story. Information gets misplaced and lost in the shuffle of new employees, different programs and things. So not just throwing money, but being very strategic and very thoughtful about how the money is being utilized, and having enough people who are there and enough people who are actually skilled and trained to do the job that needs to be done, because it's hard working with homeless populations because it's not a cookie cutter kind of system. Every family and every individual has a different circumstance, and all that should be taken into account when working with the homeless.
Thank you for adding that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to kind of circle back to the municipality that Allegra's, I think, talking about. In that same municipality, our county seat, Norristown, just had their largest shelter closed, right, in the last few months. So the largest shelter is closed, and they're dealing with that issue, and now they're criminalizing homelessness, and it's a major, major problem. So that same municipality, if you flash back 8 years, passed an ordinance that criminalized calling the police. Called the police 3 times in 4 months, and there could be punishments for the landlord. And people were being evicted. And what was the result of this? Women who were being abused in relationships were calling domestic violence calls to the police, being abused in the relationship. Many of us may know about the cycle of violence. Many people feel like they can't get out of that relationship. They don't have the wherewithal to be able to get out of that relationship. They stay in that relationship. They call the police again. And all of a sudden they're being told by the municipality that their landlord is now being fined. And what does that do? That's going to lead to an eviction. So what we're doing is we're punishing women who are calling in for domestic violence situations by evicting them. Now, I don't mean to beat up on Norristown. I know many of the elected officials there. They're good people who care about doing the right thing, and they're struggling with an issue that is just crushing. I mean, there's no easy answer to this. That's why we're here this morning, right, to talk about this and to discuss potential solutions, but they're not easy. So they're dealing with really tough situations, but it just speaks to the magnitude of the problem. It speaks to the magnitude of the problem when local officials who are not being paid anything to be council people in Norristown are struggling, or being paid very nominal amounts, are struggling with an issue like homelessness, and basically tent cities going up in their town. And what do they do about that? But I agree with Allegra that the criminalization of homelessness is a major problem. And if you go to the Norristown Hospitality Center and you see that they have showers there and food, and you think, oh, that makes sense. But they also have P.O. boxes because homeless people cannot get their mail. I had never thought about that and how important that is to have a place where you can get your mail. If you get cited by Norristown for under this new ordinance, and they send you the citation, where's it going? And then you miss your court date, and now there's a warrant out for your arrest, and the problem just snowballs.
Thank you for sharing really just more about the magnitude of the issues that individuals who are experiencing homelessness are facing with the criminalization, as well as the burdens, the multifaceted burdens of trying to access our systems for people who feel like, oh, there's systems out there. They're not easy to access. And so as we continue our conversation thinking about affordable housing, I'm going to put these two questions together. One is that, is there a better way to balance redeveloping neighborhoods so that we have more affordable housing and that the affordable housing that we might have remains? And then second to that is, how has gentrification impacted homelessness on the Main Line? We know that oftentimes as communities are redeveloped, they're gentrified, and that those processes have also contributed to housing insecurity. And so wanting to know, how can we better balance developing these neighborhoods so that we have affordable housing? And then a little bit more about how gentrification and what we have been doing has impacted homelessness on the Main Line.
Let one of you guys go first.
Not my wheelhouse.
I would just say this, and I can't speak to the Main Line specifically. I went to school, law school at Rutgers-Camden. And Rutgers-Camden, when you first get there and you look around and, I'm in this really nice apartment and all the law students were, confined to a 6-block area. You go outside that 6 blocks in Camden and the poverty is just, it's deafening. It's crushing when you see it. 20% of people living in Camden are living with disabilities, and many more are living in poverty. And you look at, why this might be, and there's so many different reasons a place like Camden has slid back so far. But I think, the gentrification of Philadelphia probably has a lot to do with it. Where are people going? We see these beautiful buildings in West Philly and University of Pennsylvania and Drexel, expanding, and all these beautiful buildings going up, and all these beautiful dormitories for the students, and expanding into apartments in North Philly for Temple, and then you open your eyes a little more and you think, where are the folks going that live there? Where are they going? And I think what we do is we create places, pockets of poverty, and poverty, the snowball effect, it's like a boulder going downhill. And there's some police officers here I see, and I'm sure they can tell you, when you have communities where there's so much poverty, and transient communities where people are renters, they're not there, there's a lot of evictions, and that's one of the problems with evictions. It fractures neighborhoods. If people are being evicted over and over and over again, where is the cohesiveness in those neighborhoods? It's lost. People just come in and they go. And that's a huge problem with evictions and that lead to homelessness, is that people, landlords can just replace. They need the money. They can replace. They kick someone out, they remove someone, they're gone. Bring in somebody else. They know that that person might not be able to afford that apartment either, but they will for a few months at least. And that creates an even bigger problem, in my opinion.
Okay, you know, to that point, being a Temple grad myself, yes, I get it, but at least in Delaware County, it's not so much new buildings coming up in Delaware County, but people are being moved out to the margin. So if you go to 69th Street Terminal, you can't sit down in 69th Street Terminal because all of the benches and things have been removed because of the number of homeless people you find standing around. And so as not to encourage that, there's no place for them to sit. And there's a few regulars who just kind of lean against the wall. You see them every day. Or if you go to Philadelphia International Airport, there are homeless people who live at the airport. So gentrification is causing people to come out into, like I said, right on the edges of Philadelphia County, because the understanding is to them the services are better in the suburbs than they are in Philadelphia. Just a couple weeks ago, a woman, domestic violence victim, she left Southwest, went down to 30th Street Station and took the regional rail and got off in Wayne looking for a homeless shelter, because she said that she had been to shelters in Philadelphia and she didn't want to do that to her children anymore. She was looking for security. She was looking for someone to give her some real help so that she could have a stable home for her daughters, and they could get the help that they need to start over. So that's where really where gentrification affects us in the outlying counties of Philadelphia.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And just elaborating on that, we have a question. I'm going to also put these two questions together. Thank you. Could you kind of expand on your discussion of how homelessness or housing insecurity impacts children and youth? So that's one question. How common is it? And the second is what resources are there also for single individuals, male and female, who may need employment, skills, or other programs? So at both, at one spectrum, how common is it for children and youth to experience homelessness? And what is that experience like? And then also, what resources are there for individuals who are not maybe attached to a family?
Yeah, I'll start. Children, BIPOC children, 0 to 17 represent 23% of the homeless population in Montgomery County. And we saw it more than ever during COVID. Like we all said, when COVID struck, everybody went home. But our children came home to a shelter and had to quickly figure out resources. And we as staff at Family Promise had to quickly figure out resources. How are these children going to do school from home? They lacked computers. The districts lacked the ability to deliver computers to families without transportation. So we were taking our families and driving them to their school to pick up their computers. Internet access, food insecurity. So many of our kids, when COVID happened and they were doing school remotely, they were missing their free breakfast, their free lunch. And even though there were box lunches available, the family still had to go to the school to get it. And so access was a huge issue for them. For kids, school-age children, there is the McKinney-Vento law that allows homeless students to be able to return to their school of origin. But let me tell you the struggles we face. We have kids that are enrolled in our program, and they may have come from the Philadelphia School District, and that's the district they'd like to go back to their home school to set up transportation. Even when the law is on our family's side, we have districts that don't want to participate in that. They don't want to bus one way. We have other districts that are really gracious and outstanding in that, and that they will say, well, it's our responsibility to get them one direction. It's the other district to get them back. When we can get the transportation set up, sometimes our children are on a bus for an hour to get to their school of choice.
At least.
Yeah. Put your 7-year-old on a school bus for an hour. It's challenging. It's traumatizing to them. And these kids have seen it all. So they come home and they're the ones seeing the eviction notice on the door. They're the ones leaving behind many of their belongings because they can't take them. They're the ones seeing the adults struggle with the emotions of experiencing homelessness.
Oh, thank you for that. Okay.
Because I spent 20 years in public child welfare. I feel sorry for the schools, the teachers, school staff, because the children come in unclean, often sleep deprived, hungry, even when they're in a housing insecure, not even in a shelter, but when they're sofa surfing, going from house to house to house. They often don't have their school assignments. It's embarrassing to them. They lose clothing, they lose toys, anything to help them feel secure. They don't have it, and that causes children oftentimes to act out. They're falling asleep in class. They're not doing well in school. Any number of behaviors you see, and when children are in secure housing like that, that also opens them up for all kinds of victimization, which adds to the parents' mental health, because we need a place to stay. So do I turn a blind eye to what might be happening to my child? Or what might be happening to me? What am I doing to maintain this roof over our heads? It's hard. It's really, really hard for children. It is so hard, and children express stress differently than adults. You can't just sit down with a child and say, "Well, what's bothering you today?" That does not work with them, and the schools are underfunded, understaffed, and the teachers don't have the wherewithal to really deal with all of these different kinds of behaviors, and the children are embarrassed. They don't want to go to school and say, I'm homeless, or I'm living out. I don't live in the district where I'm attending school. It's hard.
Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah, to Kimberly's point, I mean, she's so right. And if you think about one aspect of evictions, when someone gets evicted, they may come home and all their belongings are on the sidewalk. Where do those belongings go, even if they're not on the sidewalk, even if they're given some notice? And oftentimes people have to choose between paying the next month's rent or keeping those their effects in a storage facility and paying that monthly rent. How do you afford that? And then you think about the impact on, as Kimberly said, on children. The most important thing about raising kids, I'm still learning. I got a 10 and an 8-year-old. I'm struggling through the process myself, but I'm pretty darn sure that stability is so, so important and so crucial in a child's development and their education. And they get evicted once, and they're losing a lot. They're not only losing the home and all that comes with that, they're losing their effects potentially. Like Kimberly said, things go missing, clothing goes missing. People have to make tough choices. And I would also point out that a large factor in evictions is domestic violence and escaping that domestic violence. And what is the impact on those children? 96 adults and 95 children were housed in Laurel House. Some of you might be familiar with Laurel House in Montgomery County, just last year. And what does that mean for those children? They're not only dealing with an eviction and a homelessness and losing that stability, but they're also dealing with domestic violence and all that comes with, and all that they see in their own home before they're evicted.
Well, thank you for that. And so as we kind of begin to near the end of our time together, I know it goes by so very quickly and such an important conversation. I'm going to put these questions together, and then we'll probably get to our sort of wrap-up question. So as we begin to think about what is it that we can do to support individuals and families who may be insecure, the first question talks about how many people are newly middle class. And so what do Black, brown, and white families who struggle with taking in relatives need to hear? Many may feel guilty for not taking in family members who may have mental health needs or homelessness, which, the better off, quote unquote, family members, also can address. So what can we do to support family members if you have that opportunity? And then also, are there ways that volunteers can support the work of social workers and others in providing legal or advocacy or other services for homeless or insecure populations? So what can we do on the family side, and then what can we do on the volunteerism side? I know you had a burning thoughts.
Yes, because people who are homeless and are staying with relatives, according to the system, then you're not homeless. So until you are literally sitting on the curb, your relative is your resource. And as you said, newly middle class, you've worked really hard to get where you are. And it's hard, increasing your utility bill.
Yeah, absolutely.
Help, trying to help relatives. And then for government assistance, or who lives in the home with you. And so, are they helping you? Are you getting money from them? Because when the government says that you need to be destitute, trust and believe they mean that you need to be destitute. So then the relatives' income and resources come into play. Well, what's the income of your relative, and the hoops that people have to jump through. And so then you're being asked, well, I need to see your lease, I need to see your rental agreement. And if you're renting your home, the landlord may not know that you have family members staying with you. So you could possibly be jeopardizing your own housing status.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, what to do. These are not easily solved issues. I always chuckled, I've been doing this for 30 years, and HUD has always issued a 10-year plan to end homelessness. Every community needed to develop one. And I think that was 30 years ago, and we still are faced with homelessness and housing insecurity now more than ever. Some real practical things from my point of view is you all can volunteer at any shelter, any housing program. I mean, we have, Family Promise has 12 host congregations, 11 of which are along the main line. You like to make a meal? Drop one off at one of our host congregations. You like to talk to people? Come visit with our families. I would also encourage congregations that have property, consider how you can use some of that property. We're blessed by one of our churches right here. You're upstairs, where your facility is, Kimberly, is going to be used for a family, a mom and a daughter that have experienced so much trauma. But come October, they're going to be living in that 2-bedroom apartment at well below fair market rate rent, well below. And that's a congregation saying, we need to do something. We have a resource, and we're going to share that resource with an organization that we trust. So sharing of resources is enormous in our work and in what we're doing. And for families that have other family members struggling, I want to say it really sometimes is okay to set boundaries, because oftentimes when you've worked so hard to get to a point of stabilization on your own, like Kimberly said, you can jeopardize your lease agreement, your whatever, by bringing in more family members. And it's okay to have boundaries, but still act in love and kindness towards them. Still offer to walk with them in their journey and with them in connecting to resources, with them in being an advocate beside them.
And you know, Allegra, to your point, when you're sharing resources, I know people love, oh, I'm going to give these clothes away. I'm going to give this away. Make sure that it's something that's actually usable. Don't give people trash. Put trash in the trash, because that's another thing. When homeless people look like they're homeless for a reason, and it helps with their mental health. It helps with, you know, their sense of well-being and their ability to navigate in society, so people aren't looking at them a certain kind of way.
Thank you for that.
You know, Allegra and Kimberly just talked about what people can do, individuals and families, communities, faith-based communities, organizations. I'm going to speak as an elected official. You all need to hold every single elected official accountable. And you don't have to yell and scream at them, but you just need to ask the question, what are you doing? What are you doing about this problem? You elect them, you give them your vote, and the least that a government official can do, an elected official can do, is look you in the eye and tell you what they're doing about one of the biggest issues in our society. And I'll tell you, as in an elected position that very few people can pronounce, and some people kind of know what it is, you know, it's not always the easiest thing. I'm not a state rep, I'm not a state senator. I'm not affecting legislation, but you do what you can do. So in my office, I've worked with the DEI chief of the county, who was just hired last year, to try to make my office more inclusive, more of a community where people want to come in and feel accepted. It's the first step into the courthouse. People who are being evicted come into this courthouse. My staff of 30 are the faces that they see. And I want those faces to maybe look like them. Maybe have a Spanish speaker in my office, which we never had before. And so I worked with the DEI coordinator to change our job descriptions. And it was appalling what my job descriptions look like prior to a year ago. And we just added a little bit of language about how we're an inclusive community, an accepting community. And within weeks, we were getting resumes from people of color, young people of color, parroting the language in their resumes. I want to be part of an inclusive community that accepts me. And the last 4 hires in my office, in an office of about 28 staff members, the last 4 hires, 3 have been people of color, 2 young women with children in their early 20s. And that's important. That's important that my office, a governmental office, reflect what our community looks like. It cannot be all white, it cannot be all male, it cannot be patronage, political patronage to people that lost the last election by 1 vote and now they need a job. That's not what good government's all about. So I would encourage every single person in this room to go to your commissioner meeting. The Lower Merion commissioner is going to kill me, but go to your commissioner meetings, go to your county commissioner meetings, and just ask the questions. What are you doing?
Thank you for that. So this is going to be our wrap-up question. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time together this morning, but I'm going to kind of pair our last question. So actually, we did get to all of the questions from the audience with our final statement, and if you could just take a minute or 2 at the most to respond with your closing statement. So the question was, how has the hoteling of homeless families during the pandemic shown townships and counties a way to provide possibly more housing? So what we did during the pandemic, how is that shown effective? Is that something that we can move forward? And then thinking about our closing statement is, what is a policy needed to reduce homelessness? We talked about how many policies create the disparities that we see in homelessness and create housing insecurity. So what should we be advocating for as we think about and talk to our elected officials as we are in a time of hearing from candidates? What is a policy that we should be advocating for? And is the hoteling of what we learned during COVID, is that something that we can move forward?
Yeah, I'll start with hoteling. I mean, it was necessary during COVID to create space and to create your own family pod, to reduce spread of the virus. Hoteling is extremely expensive. It's over $1,000 a week to hotel a family. Now, could you imagine taking that $1,000 and putting that into a rent? So that's, that's the lesson I think we all learned very quickly about how expensive it is. And I would love to see that resource be turned into rental assistance, and maybe even short-term rental assistance, or more master leasing that could occur where the organization is the tenant and we lease it over to a family, and it's difficult to get those. But a policy, well, there's tons that could be made. Don't criminalize being homeless. But I think we need to do better as a country with development, and as developers build more condos, and I know along the Main Line there's a new development that's going in, hold developers accountable to providing a set-aside of affordable housing within those developments, and making those rents affordable. That set-aside, why can't you set aside 3 units for families that are marginalized? So I think there should be some more policies around that. Also, I think our country and our government, HUD, needs to catch up with inflation and in our world. And I think we as advocates need to let our officials know HUD needs to make some changes. They have not increased their fair market ranges for rents, which are causing people with a Section 8 certificate not be able to locate an affordable apartment because their certificate sets them at a limit according to HUD, and landlords, as we know, due to inflation, those rates are much higher. So these folks cannot find housing, and other housing programs are set by you can only rent to this point, when we know over the last 6 months rents have increased dramatically. We watched a 2-bedroom apartment in Norristown that used to rent about $850, $950, go for $1,450 now. That's outside of the range. We also need to talk about self-sufficiency wages and policies around wage. When minimum wage hasn't increased, and in our community, in my community in Norristown, you need to make $26 an hour to be able to afford a 2-bedroom, a family to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. The Main Line is much higher for that self-sufficiency wage. So those are just some of my random thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you for those.
Okay,
Want to go next, Kimberly?
All right. Well, in Delaware County, using hotels has been standard practice in helping to work with homeless populations. Sometimes they'll start out in a hotel before moving to a shelter, and then moving into some other form of more permanent housing. So that has been working in Delaware County for well over 30 years. But yes, to your point, the money that's being put into hotels can be put into rental subsidies, can be put into more Section 8 vouchers, and better economics, and better looking at how much things actually cost, and job programs and educational programs to raise people's ability to earn more money. It's not just one thing. It is a whole system that needs to be overhauled in order to help to eradicate homelessness. And hopefully, with the help of elected officials, that can hopefully, prayerfully be done, because not having the knowledge of knowing that when I can go and put my key in a door and turn it and go in and be safe and secure with my belongings and have all of my basic needs met is priceless.
I don't think it should take a global pandemic or a hurricane like Ida coming through and destroying people's homes and shaking our world to its core, to come up with solutions to this problem. And we shouldn't be reactive. We should be doing things like we're doing this morning, discussing this, having the conversation so that we can be proactive. And I think that the long-term initiatives, and Kimberly and Allegra touched on many of them, they need to come to fruition. The minimum wage has to be raised. This is ridiculous. $26 an hour to live in Norristown. People aren't making $26 an hour. Let's be serious. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror, and I think, one of the main things, in my opinion, is we need to destigmatize homelessness. We need to destigmatize. These are people. These are human beings, and I've heard far too often over the last couple of years especially, but I'm sure it's been going on forever, these people aren't really part of our community. They're not from our community. You hear this far too often. These are residents in your community. These are human beings that deserve, at a minimum, like Kimberly said, the thing that we maybe take for granted, putting that key in the door, having that autonomy, that independence, that protection, and all that that comes with, and that strength that that gives you as a human being to have a home that you can come home to. But I would say that there's many things to do. I think from the legal side, I commend Montgomery County for having a bail initiative and revamping their bail program to have diversionary programs. That's all well and good for the criminal justice system, and it is important, but we should have attorneys on call for people going into court for landlord-tenant matters. If you are promised an attorney constitutionally, if you potentially could go to prison, which absolutely should be the case, and is, you should be guaranteed an attorney if you're going to lose your home. It is unfair, and we need to balance this out.
Thank you for those really important recommendations and points that we all should be advocating for, those policies, those very specific and practical things that we can do, that we can advocate for as we connect with our elected officials. Those are all of what was shared is so important. I also just want to offer and thank everyone for engaging with us on such an important discussion. All of your questions were really so important and integral to our conversation this morning. I want to just mention the book Evicted. For those of you by Matthew Desmond, he has great stories. If you really want to just walk through what people experience and the many burdens that we have and the systems and the barriers to really get a picture, maybe add that to your reading list. The name of the book is Evicted: Poverty and Profit in the American City. It's a little bit, I won't say dated, but it was been a while for a little bit, but it really paints a very accurate picture of the larger issue of housing insecurity. And I just hope that you all will join me in thanking our panelists this morning. And most of all, I hope that we will leave with at least one thing that we can commit to doing after this conversation, that our conversation doesn't end now, but that there's at least one thing that we all can commit to doing, whether it's petitioning our commissioners or our elected officials, having discussions with family members, volunteering and seeing what the needs and the resources are in our community. What's one thing that we all can do? Thank you.
Just to share, in terms of a reflection, what Sean was encouraging us to do, we were talking about marginalized and BIPOC people, especially experiencing homelessness, but I'm really glad that we spent some time talking about homeless children. So that's something that I'm going to be reflecting on and having as a takeaway from today. And I'm glad that Candace encouraged us all in light of how Sean was encouraging us in the beginning to reflect on this and to gather our takeaways. Just a couple of final remarks. Again, a big thank you to our panel and to our moderator. I feel like I really learned a lot. And thank you to Villanova University Dining Services and the staff who set up the Villanova Room. They come in early for us. Things don't usually start so early, so I really appreciate that. And couple of last things. 2023 Undoing Racism Day will be on Wednesday, September 20th, so you'll see that. If you're not signed up for emails, you can sign up at the registration table. We have just a clipboard that you can write your email on. And take a few more minutes just to talk to each other at the tables, and also to visit the literature table, but also feel free to talk to the panelists and to Dr. Robertson-James, our moderator, and any of our board members. Just talk to each other and reach out if you have questions or comments. Please feel free to do that. And thank you so much for coming and being in person, and thanks to our live streaming audience today. We will have a recording after this that we'll make available to you as well. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.